From the unexplained to the mundane, come join us on a journey to the fringe.
Hello and welcome to Journey to the Fringe, where affairs of the blackest and highest variety are both discussed and discerned to you, the listener. We are your podcast hosts with pinkies classily yet defiantly in the air, Taylor and Chelsea. And today we talk about a group that has had many a conspiracy about it, but today we're going to talk about a real conspiracy, one that is verifiably something that needs to be answered and likely has an answer, but it hasn't been spelled out outright yet. And that group is the United Nations.
I thought it was going to be a cult.
Yeah, it could have been. But for now, it's going to be the United Nations, which may or may not be a cult. I don't think people have killed themselves in the name of per se, but you know.
Okay. Let's see what you got.
So Chelsea, when I say there are conspiracies about the United Nations, what comes to mind for you?
I can't really think of anything at the top of my head. Maybe they're favoring certain country. I mean, it's politics, right?
Yeah, more or less.
In the end. So you got to believe there's some stuff going on there.
I've been listening to Too Much Knowledge Fight, which is a podcast about Alex Jones and how he's kind of full of shit. It's a great show. When you see that side of things, they really talk about how they're just the New World Order. They're part of the Economic Forum and just pushing ahead affairs to bring about a changing of the guard to the powers that they want to control. Those are the conspiracies I hear. That is a fantastical way of looking at it. I'm going to show you the very real UN, the conspiracies about it, and why it kind of comes out this way. And how we're going to look at it, we're going to look at the history, not just of the UN, but how the UN comes about, starting with a history from the League of Nations onwards. And then we're going to actually talk about the story that I have here, okay?
Okay, that sounds good.
Now, I don't know how much of this history you remember. I'm going to give a brief overview when there's a story that might need to be told. But outside of that, we're kind of just trying to stick straight to the story, okay?
Okay, where would I remember it from?
Like grade 11, grade 12.
Nope. Nothing.
Okay. Well, then you are in for a totally new ride that you've probably never heard before. So strap yourselves in and we're going to get to this.
Okay.
And of course, every talk of the United Nations starts with the League of Nations. We'll get to kind of why. And this, I found a BBC article that kind of outlined the League of Nations and its history very well, that I'm going to follow for the most part here. The League of Nations, born of the destruction and disillusionment arising from World War I, was the most ambitious attempt that had ever been made to construct a peaceful global order. It was rooted in a comprehensive liberal critique of the pre-war international system, which was widely believed to have been the cause of the carnage of World War I. The story of World War I, a bunch of cousins that got pissed at each other and then millions died. They had their family feud. The idea of the League of Nations was to eliminate four flaws of the old European states. It was in place of monarchical family spats, a world of independent nation states was emerging and should free of outside interference. The secret diplomacy of the old order would be replaced by the open discussion and resolution of disputes. Those are the first two. Third, the military alliance blocks would be replaced by a system of collective guarantees of security. And four, agreed disarmament would prevent the recurrence of the kinds of arms races that had racked up international tensions in the pre-war decade. Now, there was something that kind of predates the League of Nations, and it's called the Congress system. It was in Europe kind of exclusively, and it was just basically the great powers of Europe held occasional summits where they would chat and discuss issues they found urgent. Didn't really do much though, and obviously it led to World War II, or World War One. Sorry, spoiler alert, there's a World War II.
Wait, what?
Sorry, we'll get to that first.
Okay.
So the surviving victorious great powers from the end of the Great War, mostly Britain and France, because Germany kind of didn't survive well from World War II. World War One, geez, sorry. We're so used to talking about World War II that it's just slip of the tongue.
I'm following.
Spoiler alert.
Surprisingly.
They would have preferred to go no further than regularizing the old Congress system. But the reason this old Congress system doesn't end up holding up is because Woodrow Wilson, who was president of the US at the time, is coming on the stage as another power themselves. And he says we need a new system. He had different ideas and pushed towards the creation of a more comprehensive global organization, which would include all independent states, and in which even the smallest state would have a voice. However, hilariously, Wilson's thinking about the way that self-determination would work in the real world and about getting his idea for a community of power off the ground remained really vague. Partly, this was to avoid alarming U.S. isolationist opinions, which there was huge U.S. isolationist movements at the time. But in any case, when the League Covenant was agreed to at the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, the U.S. Senate refused to sign it. So the U.S. actually never gets involved with the League of Nations because the Senate never ratifies their involvement.
That sounds about right, actually.
Just stats. One party doesn't like the other, so they say, no, fuck you, you can't do what you like. Just cuz. And this is clear in the article. How the League would have worked with American participation remains one of the greatest what-ifs of modern history. Mostly because, this leads to World War II, but what would happen if the US was actually involved? As it was, the direction of the system was left in the hands of states, primarily Britain and France, whose altruism was questionable and whose economic resources had been crippled. Yet the League of Nations did work surprisingly well for a decade after the war. By December 1920, 48 states had signed the League Covenant, pledging to work together to eliminate aggression between countries. A series of disputes between Germany and Poland over Upper Silesia? Yeah, who knows?
I've never heard of that country.
Between Italy and Greece, and between Greece and Bulgaria, were resolved under its auspices. And these were the kind of conflicts that triggered World War I. So good on them. The proliferation of League activity, however, carried risks. As one of its founders, Lloyd George, put it, it had weak links spreading everywhere and no grip anywhere. Grip ultimately meant the capacity to use force. When the crucial concept of collective security was put in the acid test in the 1930s, it dissolved. Once big powers started to challenge the status quo, as Japan did in Manchuria, the League found it practically impossible to reach a clear verdict on who was guilty of aggression. And we covered that, the Manchurian Japan issue, in our Japanese war crimes episodes. If you want to hear about that, go back there. It's kind of a hilarious story about a fake train incident.
Oh, the incidents.
There were many incidents in Japan.
There's so many.
Or still more disastrously, in the case of Italy pressuring Abyssinia. Abyssinia would be pre-Ethiopia. That's its name before it became Ethiopia.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It was putting pressure on Abyssinia. The guilt was clear enough, but the key powers, Britain and France, were unwilling to antagonize the guilty party because of their wider strategic fears. Italy was the guilty party. They were invading Abyssinia to make it their colony. A failed attempt to impose an oil embargo on Italy demonstrated that any credible system of economic sanctions was far distant between the humiliation of seeing one of its members, Austria, taken over by Germany in 1938 without even a formal protest, and the absurdity of expelling the USSR after the outbreak of World War II in 1939, an event that neither the USSR nor the League was involved. And after this, the League pretty much ceased while World War II happens. It's just a mess leading up to World War II. Germany leaves it before the USSR is kicked out because Germany says they want an army. And of course, the World War I agreement to end it says they can't really have a real formal army. Well, Germany says, screw you, we're going to do it anyways. And they just no repercussions for it. And then the USSR gets kicked out for invading Finland. That vote, there were 15 votes, 7 in favor of kicking them out and 8 in favor of keeping them. And to even get to 7, they had to randomly add new countries to the vote to get to 7. And they still kicked them out. Yeah, it was super messed up.
Okay.
So anyways, World War II that happens. We've covered World War II enough around it. We're going to cover the rest of this. As World War II was about to end in 1945, nations were in ruins and the world wanted peace. Representatives of 50 countries gathered at the United Nations Conference on International Organization in San Francisco, California from April 25th to June 26, 1945. For the next 2 months, they proceeded to draft and then sign the UN Charter, which created a new international organization, the United Nations, which it was hoped would prevent another war like they had just lived through. 4 months after the San Francisco conference that I just talked about, the United Nations officially began on October 24th, 1945, when it came into existence after its charter had been ratified by China, France, Soviet Union, United Kingdom, and the US, which are the 5 major powers in the UN. As of April 20th, 1946, the League of Nations ceased to exist and handed over all of its assets to the UN, having granted the new UN Secretary full control of its library. So that's the history of the League of Nations and how it just kind of naturally flows into the UN. Key difference between the UN and the League of Nations is it was all just kind of a weird agreement between these parties in the League of Nations, whereas in the UN, they have different departments, but most importantly, they have 5 parties who can just veto it. and they're basically considered the most powerful countries. So if they don't like something, they can just say no, like we're not going to do this, no matter what it is.
And they couldn't do that under the League of Nations?
They could not, and that's how it kind of led to the undermining.
So is that just like incentive for them not to just leave?
To have power over them? Or do you mean in the League of Nations situation?
Like in the United Nations, how come they could just like veto things?
They can just veto things because they have more power in theory than the rest of the countries. But, it's been going on a long time, so it's hard to say if that's still the truth or not. Yeah, in any event, all countries are involved in the UN, and they've stayed there for a long time, so it's a little different than that.
Okay. And totally not anything to do with the story you're telling. I'm just curious. Okay.
So the structure of the UN was to give much stronger positions to the traditional great powers through the UN Security Council. The most significant thing about its creation, perhaps, is that this time the US did not back away. A significant number of the old league's aims and methods were transmitted into the UN. And among these were not only such low-key but effective institutions as the international courts and the international labor organizations, but also the working assumptions of the Secretariat and some key operations, including those that would soon come to be called the peacekeeping operations. The UN may have almost stumbled sideways into its peacekeeping role, but the motive and sustaining force in the process was the survival and strengthening of the expectations of international involvement in the preservation of global security. Gradually, this came to include the defense of human rights as well as the resolution of territorial conflicts. The UN's first attempt to resolve a serious conflict in Palestine in 1947-48 was unsuccessful. Some may even call disastrous, and it failed to implement its own partition plan, and its special mediator was assassinated. That's not the story that we're going to be talking about.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, they still today have not settled that.
Really?
The Palestine-Israel conflict? Yeah.
Are they still working on that, or did they?
No. Most countries have clearly made sides on that.
Wildly unsuccessful.
Other UN organizations had a shorter but more spectacular life, notably the operation in the Congo from 1960 to 1964, and this is actually what we're going to be talking about today, which prefigured the alarming future of missions to states that were dissolving into civil war. In the Congo, the UN found itself using military force against Katangan rebels to preserve the unity of the state of Congo, a departure from the principle of strict neutrality, which has usually been thought vital to the success of its peacekeeping missions. Dealing with such internal conflict was a far more ambitious and demanding task than the traditional role of assisting consenting states to observe the ceasefires, and in effect, it showed that the UN might need to take governmental responsibility in some situations. The development towards taking responsibility in countries at risk of disintegration was due to a dramatic increase in the prestige and initiative of the UN Secretary General. This was particularly true at the time when the position was held by the charismatic Dag Hammarskjöld, and this is the person we're going to be talking about today. But before that, I'm just going to give you a few things so that we kind of have a bit more stats in the UN. So the UN currently has 193 member states. Its purpose is to maintain international peace and security and to promote human rights and to provide a forum for discussion of global issues. The UN system of organizations is comprised of main organs, specialized agencies, programs and funds, research and training institutes, and a variety of affiliated and related. The General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the Trusteeship Council, the International Court of Justice, and the UN Secretariat. The Charter of the UN defines the tasks and functions of each organ. The Secretary General is the Chief Administrative Officer of the UN and is elected by the General Assembly. The organization is financed by assessed and voluntary contributions from its member states. So Chelsea, before I begin with my story, any questions about the UN?
I don't think so. I think that was fairly clear.
Okay. From here, we are going to tell you the story, the tale, if you will, of Dag Hammarskjöld.
And is this true or false?
This is a very true story.
Okay. I wasn't sure because we said conspiracy theory. Okay.
Yes, conspiracy theory. Never actually existed. Mm-hmm. Just kidding. He is very real.
Okay.
So Dag Hammarskjöld was a Swedish economist and diplomat who served as the second Secretary General of the United Nations. As of 2023, he remains the youngest person to have ever held that position. Having been only 47 years old when he was appointed, he is the son of Hjalmar Hammarskjöld, who served as the Prime Minister of Sweden from 1914 to 1917. Hammarskjöld was and remains well regarded internationally as a capable diplomat and administrator, and his efforts to resolve various global crises led to him being the only posthumous recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. He is considered one of the two best UN Secretaries General. I hate when they do that. It is pluralized on the first word.
Those bastards.
Secretaries General.
I've never really come across it, I think.
Okay.
Maybe I have.
The only other time that comes up is attorney general of a state or a province. The plural is attorneys general also.
There's so many things that don't fucking make sense.
So I guess if it's a hyphenated general, it's the first word that is pluralized, and that is why English is a fucking terrible language.
It is.
Anyhow, back to this.
Yeah.
President John F. Kennedy called Hammarskjöld the greatest statesman of our century. Immediately following the assumption of the Secretariat, Hammarskjöld attempted to establish a good rapport with his staff. He made a point of visiting every UN department to shake hands with as many workers as possible, eating in the cafeteria as often as possible, and relinquishing the Secretary General's private elevator for general use. He began his term by establishing his own Secretariat of 4,000 administrators and setting up regulations that defined their responsibilities. He was also actively engaged in smaller projects relating to the UN working environment. For example, he spearheaded the building of a meditation room at the UN headquarters where people can withdraw into themselves in silence regardless of their faith, creed, or religion. So he just sounds like a really nice guy, does he not?
Yeah, this is why he won the Nobel Peace Prize, right? Sounds so nice.
Yes. During his term, Hammarskjöld tried to improve relations between Israel and the Arab states, a task that he clearly succeeded at, because, just look at that history.
He lives so peacefully now.
Other highlights included a 1955 visit to China to negotiate the release of 11 captured U.S. pilots who served in the Korean War. And in 1956, he established the UN Emergency Force and used this in the intervention in the 1956 Suez Crisis, which I forgot to do a little bit of look into, but that's okay. Doesn't have too much to do with this.
Okay, I'll accept that.
In 1960, this is where we're getting into it. The newly independent Congo asked for UN aid in defusing the Congo crisis. Hammarskjöld made 4 trips to the Congo, but his efforts toward the decolonization of Africa were considered insufficient by the Soviet Union, which I find pretty rare that you're going to see a Wikipedia article where the USSR comes off as the good guy, where they're like, hey, you're not taking enough steps to decolonize Africa. I feel like that's not a bad position.
No, it's not. It actually kind of makes the guy look real bad.
Yeah. In September of 1960, the Soviet government denounced his decision to send UN emergency forces to keep the peace.
Wow.
They demanded his resignation and the replacement of the office of Secretary General by a 3-man directorate with a built-in veto called the Troika. The objective was citing the memoirs of Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev to equally represent the interests of 3 groups of countries, capitalist, socialist, and recently independent. So, outside of that, I'm now going to give you a little bit of info on the Congo crisis.
Okay, that would be great.
So, Congo was a colony of Belgium, and boy, how did they fuck it up hard.
I find most colonies are fucked up pretty good.
Yes, but this one in particular, how do I put this?
New level of fucked up?
Yeah, of a population of roughly 30 million, Belgium killed 10 million people through disease, through execution, through famine. And this is a wild estimate because it's anywhere from 1.3 to 13 million people that died during the Belgian rule of the Congo. There's actually a very famous picture you can find of a father sitting on a porch looking down at the hand and foot of his son because he was unable to gather enough rubber for his quota for the day. So they chopped off his son's hand and leg.
Oh my god, what? Is this it? Oh my god, that's really I can't even look at that. Colonizers are like awful in anything I've ever heard about them. And they're just kind of glossed over for the most part, I find.
We tend to focus on World War I and World War II and not the colonizing that took place around that time as well.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, that's the
super dark time. Population decreased by 20%.
That's crazy.
Anyhow. 1960s, Congo finally gains its independence. Belgians a little unhappy with the situation, but whatever, it is what it is. The Republic of Congo became independent from Belgium in June of 1960. The new country immediately descended into a political chaos known as the Congo crisis. The arbitrary boundaries drawn by colonial powers combined with leftover racial tensions and general uncertainty led to violence along racial lines and widespread mutiny in the Belgian-led army. Belgian troops sent in to protect Belgian citizens clashed with Congolese forces, leading to the UN ordering the Belgian forces out of the country. On July 11th of 1960, less than 2 weeks after the country formally gained independence, a politician named Moise Deschamps declared the southernmost province of the Congo to be an independent nation called the State of Katanga. Katanga, with its copper belt and lucrative mining operations, was the wealthiest province of the Congo. The Belgians, French, and British, wanting influence in the wealthy region, supported the Katanga movement in practice, if not in name. Despite UN regulations forbidding countries from directly supporting secessionists, members of the European armed forces became hired mercenaries in Katanga's army. Patrice Lumumba, Prime Minister of the Congo, appealed to the UN for forces to end the secessionist movement. The UN initially refused, considering the rebellion an internal issue. Patrice Lumumba had managed to acquire Soviet weapons for the Congolese army before he was deposed as Prime Minister by Mobutu Sese Seko in November 1960 and killed in early 1961. This led the UN to pass Resolution 161, which authorized UN forces to take all appropriate measures to prevent civil war in the Congo. This essentially authorized the UN to take offensive measures against the Katanga state. The conflict came to a close in January of 1963 after UN and US forces overwhelmed the Katanga military and Moise Tshembe stepped down as president of Katanga. The UN sent nearly 20,000 peacekeepers to restore order in the Congo-Kinshasa region. Hammarskjöld's refusal to place peacekeepers in the service of Lumumba's constitutionally elected government provoked a strong reaction of disapproval from the Soviets, as we talked about earlier, and the situation will become more scandalous in the assassination of Lumumba by Tshembe's troops. In February of 1961, the UN authorized the peacekeeping forces to use military force to prevent civil war, and the Blue Helmets' attack on Katanga caused Tshembe to flee to Zambia. Hammarskjöld's erratic attitude in not providing support to Lumumba's government, which had been elected by popular vote, drew severe criticism among aligned countries and communist and socialist countries. In the end, his actions were supported by the United States and Belgium in how it was going. Yeah, they quite liked it. On September 18th, 1961, Hammarskjöld was en route to negotiate a ceasefire between the United Nations operations in Congo forces and the Katangese troops under Moise Tshembe. His Douglas DC-6 airline SEBDY crashed near Ndola, northern Rhodesia, now Zambia. Hammarskjöld perished as a result of the crash, as did all 15 of the passengers on board. Hammarskjöld's death set off a succession crisis at the UN, as there was no line of succession and the Security Council had to vote on a successor. In 1962, a Rhodesian inquiry concluded that pilot error was to blame, while a later UN investigation could not determine the cause of crash. And this is where it gets interesting, Chelsea. So, Hammarskjöld, dead. Plane crash.
Another thing that I never realized was the UN has an army.
They have peacekeepers. They use them all the time.
It doesn't seem very peacekeeping like what they're doing.
Yeah, in this situation, they were used with force, which is actually pretty rare for a UN involvement.
Okay, so guys dead in a plane crash. I'm kind of all over the place here, but I feel like I'm following it.
Okay, good. And Rhodesia said it was pilot error that caused this.
Okay, totally believable, I'm sure.
Then CIA comes out and actually says it was the KGB that was responsible. The Soviet Union did.
No.
And then, the day after the crash, now former president at the time, not now, but at the time he was the former US president, Harry Truman, commented that Hammarskjöld, quote, was on the point of getting something done when they killed him. Notice what I said, when they killed him, end quote.
The KGB.
Yeah, he's clearly emphasizing the KGB.
Okay.
And then, in 1998, documents surfaced suggesting the CIA, MI6, and or Belgian mining interests' involvement via a South African paramilitary organization. The information was contained in a file from the South African National Intelligence Agency turned over to the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission in relation to the 1993 assassination of Chris Hani, leader of the South African Communist Party. These documents included an alleged plot to, quote, remove, end quote, Hammarskjöld, and contained a supposed statement from CIA director at the time, Alan Dulles, that, quote, Dag is becoming troublesome and should be removed, end quote. Hammarskjöld's mission to end the war over the mineral-rich Katangese secession from the newly formed Republic of Congo was contrary to the interests of those organizations. However, these documents were copies rather than originals, precluding substantiation or authenticity through ink and paper testing. So those papers come to light 35 years after this crash actually takes place.
What? And they were fake?
No, it's not necessarily fake. They couldn't verify because they weren't original.
Oh, okay. That's what you... Okay.
Then, in 2014, newly classified documents reveal that the American ambassador to the Congo sent a cable to Washington, D.C. warning that the plane could have been shot down by Belgian military pilot Jan van Riesebeek,
Oh my god.
commander of the small Katanga Air Force. Van Riesebeek died in 2007. On March 16, 2015, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon appointed members to an independent panel of experts to examine new information related to Hammarskjöld's death. The three-member panels were led by Mohamed Chande Othman, the Chief Justice of Tanzania, and included Karen McCauley, Australia's representative to the International Civil Aviation Organization, and Henrik Larsson, a ballistic expert on the Danish National Police. The panel released a 99-page report on July 6, 2015, and assigned moderate value to 9 new eyewitness accounts and transcripts of radio transmission. Those accounts suggested that Hammarskjöld's plane was already on fire as it landed, and that other jet aircraft and intelligence agents were nearby.
What?
So their report found that as the plane was going down, it was already on fire, and there were other planes in the vicinity as it was going down. In 2016, the original documents from the 1998 South African investigation surfaced, and those familiar with the investigation cautioned that even if authentic, the documents would have been initially authored as part of a disinformation campaign. So it turned out those documents from earlier were real, but maybe they were made fake at the time. Who knows?
Why are these all coming to light so long after?
They all came to light due to the assassination of the leader of the Communist Party of South Africa in 1998.
Oh, okay. You did
Yeah.
say that. Yes. Okay.
And all this starts to kind of domino out because of it.
Mhm.
And in 2019, the documentary film Cold Case Hammarskjöld by Danish filmmaker Mads Brugger claimed that Jan van Riesebeek had told a friend that he shot down Hammarskjöld's aircraft. That's that guy from earlier. This went against the official stance maintained by van Riesebeek's family that he was not involved in the death of Hammarskjöld. According to an interview with Riesebeek's wife, he was in Rhodesia negotiating the purchase of a plane for the Katanga Air Force, with the logbooks providing proof that he was not flying for Katanga at the time. The documentary crew interviewed multiple colleagues of Van Riesebeek for the film, all of whom supported their theory. In an interview with Swedish historian Leif Hellström, Van Riesebeek claimed that he was not in South Africa at the time the crash happened, and dismissed the idea of his being potentially involved in fairy tales. Previously unpublished documents continue to emerge from the UN or National Archives, one found in France amidst the Fons Folkart National Archives in Pierrefitte. In November of 2021, they found a death warrant for Hammarskjöld signed by the infamous OAS, the secret organization nestled in the French army at the time of the Algeria's War of Independence. So the French army had a death warrant out for Hammarskjöld at the time. The document reads, quote, "It is high time to put an end to his harmful intrusion. This sentence common to justice and fairness to be carried out as soon as possible," end quote. The source was revealed by French journalist Maureen Picard, and I just need to make this clear. The reason Belgium and everybody supported Katanga is because it's a small region with all of the mineral wealth in Congo, and they found a convenient dictator who would just let them do what they want with these resources. So Belgium's happy,
okay.
France is happy, the US is very happy with that situation, and that's why they were on the Katanga side for separation.
Okay.
And this is an article, I'm just going to read certain key points from it, because I found it fantastic, called Dag Hammarskjöld's Plane Crash, What Really Happened to the UN Chief, from foreignpolicy.com. Investigators fear they are running out of time to get to the bottom of what happened. Key witnesses from the time period are dying off, and the UN inquiry, led by former Tanzanian Chief Justice Mohamed Chande Othman, is set to conclude in September without having established conclusively the circumstances of how the plane crashed. Othman has been investigating the case on and off for the UN since March 2015. I believe the year is 2022 on this one, it might be 2020. Over the years, Othman has amassed, quote, significant amount of evidence, end quote, including the testimony of African eyewitnesses suggesting foul play was largely ignored by early investigators in the 1960s. That goes against claims by British colonial authorities in northern Rhodesia at the time that Hammarskjöld's death was an accident. Othman has explored a theory that a mysterious aircraft may have either fired on Hammarskjöld's plane or harassed the pilot, causing it to crash, or even that the plane had been sabotaged by South African mercenaries, allegedly with the aid of CIA and other Western intelligence agencies. The CIA had previously denied involvement in the agency's Operation Celeste. Othman said in his 2 previous reports, issued in 2007 and 2019, maintained that the burden of proof was on member states to demonstrate that they had conducted a thorough review of their records and archives, particularly from their intelligence agencies. Quote, the continued non-disclosure of potentially relevant new information in the intelligence, security, and defense archives of member states constitutes the biggest barrier to understanding the full truth on the event, end quote, Hoffman wrote in 2017 report. So he's trying to get all the evidence he can, and no parties that he thinks are involved are cooperating in having over their evidence.
Yeah, it seems like everybody kind of wanted him.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about this at the end, because that's the part I find so weird about it.
Weren't there eyewitnesses that saw other planes, or was that just a document altogether that was...
No, there are, and they are in the official reports sent to the UN. There are 3 official reports done by Hoffman, and we'll get to that later.
That there are other aircraft? Yes. Okay.
The government of Zimbabwe, Zambia, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo have appointed high-ranking figures, including Sidney Sakaramai, a former Zimbabwean defense minister, to oversee the search for documents and have provided full access to their archive. Belgium, France, and Sweden have also granted extensive access to their security files, but the US and Britain have been less forthcoming, appointing relatively low-level officials to manage the search for relevant evidence and releasing the occasional confirmation of evidence brought to them by the UN. A Rhodesian commission of inquiry found that the pilot had miscalculated the height of the tree line and plowed into the forest canopy, the official story from the original time. The subsequent UN inquiry could not establish the cause of the crash, leaving open the possibility that Hammarskjöld could have died either as a result of an accident or foul play. Eyewitnesses in the area recall seeing a small plane approach the Albertina before there was a bright flash in the sky, and then watching a flaming aircraft plunge into the forest, instantly killing everyone on board except the delegation's acting chief security officer, Harold Julian, who died from his injuries nearly a week later. Before his death, Julian, a former US Marine, suggested a threat or attack as the plane approached Ndola, possibly involving a sudden explosion, according to Hoffman's report. Quote, this evidence was augmented in 2018-19 by information from Zimbabwe that showed that Northern Rhodesian authorities had tried to stifle those statements of Julian from being made public, end quote, Hoffman wrote in 2019. Hoffman has cited documents indicating that British officials had intervened behind closed doors to persuade the UN to alter the conclusion of the report to rule sabotage or an external attack. In 1992, 2 of Hammarskjöld's top advisors, Connor Cruz O'Brien and George Ivan Smith, wrote in The Guardian that they had evidence that their boss's plane had been shot down by accident by mercenaries in the employ of Belgian, American, and British mining interests, which feared Hammarskjöld's peacemaking would jeopardize their business interests. Goran Björkdahl, a Swedish national whose father worked in the region, began researching the UN chief's death and conducting interviews with local charcoal makers who had witnessed Albertina's final descent. Rhodesian and UN investigators at the time largely dismissed the testimony of local Black African witnesses. The case received a boost when Susan Williams, a British scholar who grew up in Zambia, revisited the crime, unearthing previously unseen documents from the archived papers of Lord Cuthbert Elport, who was the British High Commissioner of Rhodesia in 1961, and who was at the Ndola airport on the night of the crash, including a secret report by Neil Ritchie, an MI6 agent who organized the planned meeting between Hammarskjöld and Tishambe. Williams' 2011 book, Who Killed Hammarskjöld? The UN, the Cold War, and white supremacy in Africa helped spur the establishment a year later of the Hammarskjöld Commission, a voluntary body of international jurists and lawyers chaired by the British judge Stephen Sedley. Williams has since fed documents to the UN investigators. Quote, the response of the US and the UK to Judge Hoffman have been appalling and arrogant, end quote. Williams told Foreign Policies in an email, quote, but they are entirely consistent with the behavior of those states at the time of the crash, when Britain was the colonial and racist ruler of Northern Rhodesia, and the US was interfering in the process of decolonization in Africa, end quote. I shouldn't end quote. Both the UK and the US stated that all relevant information had been made available, but this was not true in either case, end quote. The Hammarskjöld Commission concluded in its final 2013 report, quote, there is persuasive evidence that the aircraft was subjected to some form of attack or threat as it circled to land at Ndola, end quote. It is also concluded that it is highly likely that the entirety of the local and regional Ndola Ndola radio traffic on the night of September 17 and 18, 1961 was tracked and recorded by the NSA and possibly also by the CIA.
Of course it was.
These findings prompted the UN General Assembly in 2015 to adopt a resolution calling on then UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to create a panel of experts to examine the case and determine whether there was enough evidence to merit further investigation. At the time of Hammarskjöld's death, the United States and Britain had extensive intelligence assets in the region, including CIA agents and NSA surveillance capabilities. But much of what the UN has learned about US activities in the region has come from independent researchers, private archives, or other governments. Othman has asked the US to provide access to intercepts or other evidence of communications from Hammarskjöld's plane or other US aircrafts in the area at the time of the crash. On the night of the crash, there were at least 3 US planes, including US Navy and Army attaches aircrafts, equipped with the state-of-the-art surveillance equipment at the airport in Ndola. One of the US intelligence officials, Charles Southall, recalled in the interviews having overheard intercepts of a known European mercenary pilot, nicknamed the Lone Ranger, shooting Hammarskjöld's plane. And the US ambassador to Congo, Edmund A. Guillaume, sent a report to Washington on the day Hammarskjöld was killed, stating that the plane may have been shot down.
Oh, that's convenient.
The historical records strongly suggest that governments, including the US, which had a presence in and around the Congo region at the time, may hold such evidence, Othman wrote in an annex to his 2019 report. But the US has provided limited confirmation for years. Washington denied that Paul Abram, a former US Air Force Security Service officer who also overheard transmissions of an attack the night of the crash, worked for the United States, only acknowledging his links to the US intelligence after he furnished American officials with his government identification. So they are absolutely not involved in this conversation, all giving absolutely minimal information, as it's clearly shown.
Yeah, and they are pointing the blame at someone else.
Oh, they're just saying we don't have anything. We don't know what happened. I don't know.
But they said the Lone Ranger was there.
No, somebody did. Somebody who worked for the government. But they say they have none of those records, or that they can even confirm that guy worked for the U.S.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood. I thought that was them being like, oh, yeah, all our planes were there, and we definitely could, like, pick some stuff up.
No, they're like, oh, look, we don't have any records. And that guy who's there is like, no, we have those records. And they're like, we don't even know you work for us. A spokesperson for the U.S. State Department said the United States takes Othman's inquiry seriously and, quote, shares his interest in understanding the circumstances of the death of Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld, end quote. I cannot end quote there. Over the years, the U.S. has shared over 1,000 pages of previously classified documents with the UN investigators, end quote. The spokesperson said, speaking on condition of anonymity. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence and the official added, quote, they conducted yet another exhaustive search of the U.S. intelligence archives and did not find any additional information that would shed light. So they're saying that they've turned everything over they possibly could.
Was there a wink at the end? You can't see that because it's written down.
It was super sarcastic how they were saying it. British and Rhodesian colonial intelligence officials were also intercepting communications, suggesting that they were pertinent clues buried in their own archives. Othman is seeking access to documents describing the activities of Ritchie, the MI6 agent, and other British officials who were tasked with organizing a meeting between Hammarskjöld and Dushanbe. Othman also sought information about a Belgian mercenary pilot, Jan van Rissingen, whose name keeps coming up, who had served in the British Royal Air Force during World War II, and is alleged to be a colleague to have admitted to flying the plane that brought down Hammarskjöld's aircraft. Pierre Coppens, a colleague of the Belgian pilot, asserted in the documentary Cold Case Hammarskjöld that Van Rissingen was known as the Lone Ranger. This is where we're going to talk about him. Othman is also seeking information from the South African government about an alleged plot by paramilitary group known as the South African Institute for Maritime Research, which, man, for a terrorist group, that is a weird name. Their plan was to assassinate Hammarskjöld by placing a bomb in his plane before it left the airfield in Leopoldville, now the Congolese capital of Kinshasa, en route to Ndola. In a March 2019 letter to South Africa, Othman said he understood that the South African government had located documents detailing the plan, dubbed Operation Celeste, that came up earlier with the CIA, but that those documents have never been shared with the UN. And this last little bit is on Jan van Rissingen. And he has been named as a possible attacker before, but has always described simply as a Belgian pilot. And this comes from The Observer. So The Observer can now reveal that he had extensive ties to Britain, including a British mother and wife, trained with the RAF, and was decorated by Britain for his services in the Second World War. Von Rizzigem, whose father was Belgian, escaped occupied Europe at the start of the war to join the resistance in England. He trained with the RAF and flew missions over Nazi-held areas during this period. He met and married his British wife, cementing a lifelong connection. For decades, Von Rizzigem appeared to have proof that he wasn't flying in the region. On the night of Hammarskjöld's plane, the Albertina came down outside Ndola in Zambia and then called northern Rhodesia. Flight logs, meticulous records of where and when he flew, appear to show Van Rizzigem was not flying for most of that month, returning to duty only on September 20th. However, Roger Bracco, another mercenary flying for the Katangis, told filmmakers that his colleagues' logbooks are dotted with apparent forgery. He does not believe that Van Rizzigem shot down Hammarskjöld, but when asked in an interview for the film if he considered the logbook fake, he responds, quote, "I won't say, but I didn't recognize the story it told." He leafed through the book. He later directly accuses Von Rizzigem of forgery. Quote, "This is fake," end quote. Bracco says bluntly one flight destination and goes on to add that some of the names listed for co-pilots are not real. A friend has also come forward to claim that less than a decade after Hammarskjöld's death, Van Rizzigem told him he had attacked the plane. Pierre Coppens met Van Rizzigem in 1965 when he was flying for a parachute training center in Belgium. Over several conversations, he claimed the pilot detailed how he overcame various technical challenges to down the plane, unaware who was traveling. Quote, "He did not know. He said, I made the mission, and that's all. And then I had to go back and save my life." And that's the end of that. So, there's definitely a conspiracy. But the thing is,
Oh, for sure.
there are so many that it's hard to actually say which one's the one that happened. Was it the British that shot him down? Was it the CIA? Was it Von Rizzigem? It was probably Von Rizzigem. But as it was going down, did the South Africans blow it up?
It could be all of them.
And this is still going on as of today.
Yeah.
Othman's report came out in 2022. It's called the Othman's Imminent Persons Report. And I found a few key quotes from it I just wanted to highlight. There's 3 paragraphs, so it won't take long. As mandated, I have also sought to draw conclusions from the investigations already conducted. As in 2019, I assessed that it remains plausible that an external attack or threat was the cause of the crash. However, it is not reasonable to reach a conclusion as to the cause of the tragic event based on presently available but incomplete information. This is because material information that appears to have been created or held by member states remains undisclosed.
I was just gonna say disclosed. Did I miss?
Remain
We
undisclosed.
solved the mystery.
In March 2020 and subsequently, I sent requests for information to the 4 key member states that have been identified in 2019 that were urged by the Assembly to engage further with the process of disclosing relevant records. They are the Russian Federation, South Africa, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the United States of America. The 2017 and 2019 report concluded that the burden of proof had shifted to certain member states to show that they had conducted a full review of records and archives in their custody or possession. I respectfully submit that the burden of proof to conduct a full review of records and archives resulting in full disclosure has not been discharged at present time. Indeed, information received from other sources under the present mandate underscores that it is almost certain that these member states created, held, or were otherwise aware of specific and important information regarding the cause of the tragic event. That information is yet to be disclosed.
Yeah, obviously.
And that is the story of the assassination of Dag Hammarskjöld.
What do you think?
I don't fucking know. If you want to keep up to date on it, there is literally a website called hammarskjöldinquiry.info where you can learn more about this and keep up to date with the most recent findings. There is literally news updates. The last one being July 19th of 2023.
Well, they certainly picked the name that everybody could spell just
All the
hearing
Swedes
it.
could spell it, yeah. And it is definite there was foul play involved, but there are so many bad actors that are not helping in the story that clearly have some sort of involvement that is hard to actually say the actual story that took place.
Well, it's always funny when there's just bad story and cover up, when it's obvious that something's going on. And it seems to happen in so many of these conspiracy things that you're just we can tell that something's going on. And then people who are there's no conspiracy are well, why would it be that bad?
And there's no question there's a conspiracy here. The literal paper to the UN about this says, I don't know what happened because people won't give me the records. All I know is there was foul play. But the problem is okay, Yan shot him down. Okay, then why is the US not handing over records? Did they pay him? Were they involved in setting it up?
Exactly.
But then, why did France have this contract to kill? out on Hammarskjöld? And then, why are there records showing that the South African group blew up the plane?
That's why I say everyone's involved. We may never know, because even the guy said we're coming up to the point where everyone's going to be dead.
Yeah, but like, these are the actual conspiracies about the UN. They aren't some secret organization that's controlling everything from behind. Like, they're very clearly a bureaucratic thing that can't do much.
Yeah.
These are the real stories that you need to look at. And this is the real bad actors on that level that need to be looked at, or the people that are involved on that side of it, and still won't turn over their record.
Well, they're probably all guilty.
Oh yeah, there's a reason they're not turning over their records.
So can't the UN do they have no recourse?
No, because it involves, of the 4 countries that won't hand over records, 3 of them are part of the Security Council and have veto power. So like, what are they going to do?
There's always some way around things for
the powerful, yes.
Yeah, for the powerful to commit atrocities.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not really sure what to comment here. That was a good one.
It's a very real conspiracy without an answer to this day, because there's so many plausible answers. and yet still, all of them could be right at the same time.
I know, that is the really weird part. All of them seem very plausible and you can make it fit. So that's why I rest with all of them.
It all happened.
It's all of them. And they probably,
there was a French assassin on the plane as it was getting shot down, and then the South Africans blew it.
Couldn't they have like all got together and been like, let's hire this guy and then we'll all just cover for each other?
They could have. They won't turn over the damn records.
Then it's like that one where who drew the short straw, nobody knows. So then they all just like, they'll never know.
I thought the whole point of drawing straws was so that you knew who drew the short straw.
The long straw? Is it that nobody knows?
What? No, are you talking about blanks in the rifle?
Yeah, that one. You knew the one I was trying to get at.
So when you're assassinating somebody by gunfire or firing squad,
yeah, that one.
There's only a few active bullets, and there's at least one blank so that nobody knows who actually fired the killing round.
Yeah, that's a good theory, right?
I mean, it's not terrible, and like just as plausible as anything else, except for pilot error. Unless you count the fact that a dead pilot can make errors and not piloting a crashing plane.
Well, I mean, he's making all errors, technically.
Yeah. Should have been alive.
It's the first rule of flying a plane.
It really is. They will not put a dead man in the pilot's seat.
They will not.
Unless you believe the 9/11 theories, but that's a whole other thing that we will not touch for a while. Having said that, Chelsea, do you have anything else to say?
No, I don't think I can really particularly add anything on that, other than it's always refreshing when you get kind of like a non-crazy conspiracy theory, even though we're just getting off one that's very
I feel like we've
crazy.
been progressing from, we went through the Serpo story, we went through Britney Spears, and now a very grounded story. It's a really nice return.
I can't wait to see what we have next.
Well, speaking of that, I have been Taylor, here with Chelsea. We are Journey to the Fringe. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next week with whatever less crazy story we may have.
Okay, bye.
Thank you for listening to Journey to the Fringe. If you have liked what you have listened to, please like, share, subscribe, or follow, depending on what venue you are listening to us through. Also, please, if possible, leave a 5-star review, as that really helps us in the algorithms. Should you wish to interact with us, please check us out on your social media of choice. I bet you we are there. And if you really want to communicate with us and give us ideas for new episodes, or tell us that we're wrong and terrible, either way, please send us an email at journeytothefringe@gmail.com. For now, I'll see you in the next episode.